but I'm glad I chose Tim to introduce because I have always looked up to Starfire. I don't know anything about them, by the way, but everybody I've ever met from Starfire has been extremely dynamic. So whatever they do, they create dynamic people. That's all I got to say. I have no idea how you guys get there and where y'all came from. So when I was told, suggested I was looking for a topic around kind of the big picture of our services and what really is the sustainability of county boards of DD and where we're going in the big picture, right? Like how long can we keep doing what we're doing and what's going to happen in the future? I was told that you should call Tim Vogt. And I was like, well, I mean, I love Starfire, but I don't know Tim. So he and I had a great Zoom call with Kate Green and a couple other people from there. And he and I just could tell across the Zoom that he and I were really seeing eye to eye. And so I'm really excited to hear. But I'm going to give you the official bio so that you'll learn who Tim is just like me, okay? Besides just a really awesome person from Starfire. So Tim has over 25 years of experience working with people with disabilities and over 20 years of management, fundraising, and coordinating experience. Tim has spent his career studying and innovating around person-centered design and social connections for people with disabilities, their families, and their neighbors. He led Starfire through a transformation from segregated disability programming to inclusive community programming. In 2017, Tim took on a new role at Starfire to collaborate and learn with organizations and families to spread Starfire's mission and message. So let's all welcome Tim Vogt from Starfire. All right, Tim. I'm like your hype band. Okay.
Should we try this? Does this work? We go. Okay.
Oh yeah, that's right. You don't need that. I'll take that from you.
Thank you, Lisa. Well, I'm told by Lisa that this is the state track.
State update track. Yeah.
State update.
I don't know how you got here. Look at you.
This has been my dream, to be in charge of the state. It's likely a lot of your nightmare. But I really come today with, is this our clicker here, Stefan? Okay. I come here today with a real affection for you all in the county boards. I also come with a little bit of worry. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to meet with the very last superintendent of the Dane County, Wisconsin Board of DD Services. Of course, as you know, they had a robust county board system up there, and it was slowly dismantled, primarily by the forces of managed care. And I worry about Ohio because I'm a big believer in local subsidiarity, which is a fancy way of saying the power of the people that live around each other. You all at the county boards, in my opinion, represent a dedicated power that's critical to inclusion of human beings with disabilities and their families. And so I'm here as an ally. And I'm also really curious about what that power has to offer that a managed care system doesn't, right? So again, I'm Tim, I work at Starfire. What we care about is relationships and connections. We don't imagine that being on a schedule of, some managed care companies, reimbursable, blah, blah, blah. We think also that you can't prescribe friends. You can't say, well, if you're going to get safety, if you're going to get purpose and meaning and connection out of your life, you can't just have somebody say, we need you to get 2 of those by next year, and that's just going to happen, right? So it can't be manufactured. So I think you all hold a really interesting and important opportunity. So I come with appreciation. And I also know that there's a lot of pressures. A lot of you have big jobs that I really admire and respect all the complexity of it. I think it's really cool to see how you manage it, Jen. It's impressive. You've got everybody coming at you, and we're at this interesting crossroads of our work, right? The stuff that worked for the past 50 years in our system is not going to cut it for the next 50. And look at us, we get to be the people who get to stand in the middle of that, right? Fun times. It is fun. It's also a little scary, isn't it? So that's where our creativity comes in. We're going to have to think a little bit differently because there is an opportunity, and it's an important one, which is to, as I like to say, for the first time in the history of the state of Ohio, figure out how to fully include people whose bodies and minds don't work like other people's, right? And that's not only just for the first time in the state of Ohio, it's the first time in this country. And it's not just the first time in the country, it's the first time in human history that we've done a good job at this. So we have a significant opportunity ahead of us, which is pretty exciting. So I work at Starfire, which is down in Cincinnati. It's super tiny, only like, what, $1 million a year? Used to be 1.5. We'll talk about that in a minute. But lots of times I get a little insecure. Do we even matter? We're so small. You know, we're like 1% of Hamilton County Board's budget, basically, right? So what do we matter? But the way I think about it is we're kind of a jib sail. You all know what a jib sail is? Any sailing people? I mean, I know we're a real nautical area of the country, but it's the pink sails on the front of this ship. So the big sails, right, catch the wind, steer the ship, but the jib sail helps to create speed. The jib sails can catch the front winds, sometimes called a head sail, give a lot of speed. They're not really encumbered by the other sails or encumbered by the rest of the boat. So in a way, I think a Starfire is kind of this front tip of things, and I like to act like that too. In particular, I think one of the things in our field that I've been a little concerned about is that we don't do much in the way of research and development like other companies do, right? We are in Cincinnati, the big company in Cincinnati, P&G, Procter & Gamble. P&G, they literally will start a secret company that competes with their big brands. And they won't tell their employees that they're doing it because they know that that big thing will get nervous if the new thing pops up. And then once the new thing is successful, they'll roll that up into the big thing, right? So they have this robust research and development department. I don't think we do that very well in our field, even in nonprofits or government services in general, right? So that's how we like to behave. We're kind of like a research and development company. And a lot of partnerships that we do, even with county boards, we do a lot of partnerships around that. What do you want to learn? How do we help you learn it so that it kind of operates outside the mothership? Does that make sense? So anyway, I just got to get that out of the way or else I'll feel insecure the rest of this presentation. So this is the most important thing that I've learned in my career. When we first started moving out of our segregated day program and our segregated outings, we discovered a really cool thing. Our staff were awesome at connecting people with disabilities to other people without disabilities. It's fun. People threw beer brewing parties and poetry slams and things like that. And overall, we added, for every project we ran, added 4 new people to the life of a person with a disability per year, basically, which was really interesting and important. The staff, what they learned was even more important, that their job wasn't to be the end point of the person's social experience, but to be the connector to other people that would outlast them, right? That was a big aha, was we started realizing, what if we all copped to the idea that we're only temporary in people's lives, but what if we use our temporariness to connect them to permanence? And for us, permanence usually looks like family and neighborhood, right? So we do all these cool projects and we get things rocking and rolling. Our staff are connectors, but they're still up against it. They would come to me and say, well, we had a great project, but this person's life isn't finished yet, right? And they were disappointed in themselves. Am I doing a bad job? I'm guessing a lot of you feel like this an awful lot of the time. You do a great job, you make things happen, whatever role you're working, and you're still up against it, and the people that you support are still up against it, right? We're over in the keynote here, and I'm like listening, I'm like, oh, it's getting worse, right? Every single slide, the shoulders are just starting to sink. But as you all know, we relight our candles every single morning, right? Brand new. And we say, how do we keep going up against it? Because we're with people that do that too. People and families get up every morning and face it together. And that's what we used to tell our staff. Listen, the thing you're up against is never going to stop. There's always going to be more devaluation of people with disabilities and their families. There's always going to be more people to invite. You're never done. And that was important learning for them, right? So we learned all this. There was still more work to do. So we stepped into this big lesson, which was that the problem that we thought we were up against was disability. We tried to fix it. We tried to put therapy around it. We tried to build social skills out of it, but it still persisted. We're like, why aren't these people getting more included, less disabled, whatever you want to say in your mindset, right? Still is a big problem for us. And then we started to learn that that wasn't the problem. That every time we launched a little project in someone's neighborhood, the people around them actually started to step up. And we started to realize that it wasn't a person with a disability that's a problem, wasn't their family, it was our culture. That's the problem, right? And we're like, oh my gosh, now you've stepped into something huge. How do you fix culture, Steve? Sure. That's kind of what we learned, is that culture can be healed on a very local level, like literally on the block, right? You can start to build a new culture around each person. Give them a different new identity that helps other people get to know their literal name, right? So they go from being the people with disabilities showing up in the Starfire van to Tim or Steve or Lisa, right? So that was it. How do you fix culture? Not on a big scale, but on a small scale, one person at a time. And then we started to ask, well, if culture is the problem, then who are our colleagues? And we need more of them. And we started to look and understand that people with disabilities themselves who were enacting these cool projects were our colleagues. And that was pretty exciting, because all of a sudden we felt like we were discovering a new form of dignity. Because before that, we'd always just thought that the people on our payroll were our colleagues, and the people with disabilities we were supporting were our product, so to speak, right? But understanding them as colleagues and healing the culture around each of them was a powerful notion. So this is it. This is the most important thing I've learned in my career, is that our problem is culture, the way our culture treats, thinks about, and supports people with disabilities, or doesn't support. And our colleagues in healing that culture are people with disabilities and their families and their neighbors, okay? So just start with there so you all know. I don't know, Karen, were you in the room when like Nancy Thaler brought some data about 10 years ago about workforce crisis? Do you remember that moment? Did you freak out like me? I did. Nancy Thaler shows up and she says, we're sitting in this room, was it like downstairs at Hamilton County, your all's office? She says, look, we got a big problem on the horizon. She says, the primary caregivers in our work, in general, in caregiving work, are women between the ages of 25 to 45. I think this is 2011, 2012, somewhere around there. It's like 10 years ago. And she says, as the boomers age, sorry, boomers, this is not really your fault. These are just data. As they age, they will require more care, which means that these women between the ages of 25 to 45 will be stretched thinner. And everybody in that room was like, holy shit, we are in trouble, right? Because we were hearing from her that there were big problems. Not only that, but she said that there was also a political problem, and that some of the possible answers would be immigration. We could bring people in that would want to work in those jobs, and that we could increase the capacity of the system. How's the immigration debate going in our country over the last 10 years? Are we there? Do we figure it out? I don't pay attention to the news. I'm not sure. Lisa, we got it? Not yet. I have these neighbors across the street. They're from the Marianas Islands. They throw great hibachi grill barbecues. They came here because they were recruited about 20 years ago to work in nursing homes. And they brought all their family. I think there's like 30 or 40 of them that I can tell that are somewhere in greater Cincinnati, northern Kentucky. That ability for them to come stopped after they came in, right? There's not many people from there that can get in the country now to do the work that they've been doing for 20 years. So it's not just Nancy's theory, right? It's also a reality. Anyway, when I was thinking about this, I was like, we should look at how that held up. We should check out what Nancy said and see if it's true. So this I pulled from a 2017 population projections, Census Bureau, something or other. And sure enough, they found that in 2020, they estimated 3.5 working age adults for every person over 65, right? So roughly, we're going to have 3.5 working age adults for people that need care-ish in 2020. In 2060, that number drops to 2.5 for every one person that is going to need some care. Nancy was right. We should have been listening. And of course, she was right about the immigration too, right? So I did freak out. And I remember in particular, I was concerned because in that room, literally, I heard people, we got in small groups. Joe made us get in small groups like she always does. We had to talk about it. And people said, well, we're going to have to figure out how families take on more. That's what people said for the most part. And I thought, that's troubling. I didn't hear anybody say, we might need to rethink how we use our money. We might need to rethink how our system behaves. So that was a little concerning. And honestly, I'll just say it, ladies, it means moms are going to have to take on a lot more, right? That's the reality. We're working on it, but that's still a reality. It's a dynamic. So anyway, I was worried. We got a stress system on the horizon and more responsibility shifted back to families, but I was not hearing any resources being allocated at the time for families to take on that responsibility. And not only that, but the responsibility was something I was a part of seducing them into in the first place, right? That I would take it on, that we as a system would take it on. And now we're saying, whoops, things are screwed, you got it back. It didn't feel like a fair deal. Anyway, I had two hints because I was really curious about this problem. The first hint was from a father of a person with a disability that has been one of my best friends for roughly 26 years now. And he and I were having lunch and he says, Tim, my son has to have more components in his life than just work and family. He said, it's enough for me and you. It's kind of a lazy way to be. He's like, but it's enough. He's like, but for him, he's going to have to have a lot more. And this guy and his family put their money where their mouth is. They committed themselves to building a life outside of the system for their son. So he was in our day program at the time, and he asked me what I thought, and I started talking about employment and neighbors and things like that. They started attending political things because they're big members of a political party in Cincinnati that I was not a personal fan of, but I was also just happy that they were getting connected. And then they got him a job. He actually exited our day program 1 year early than he was scheduled to, because they believed so much that this life outside of our system was what they were after. They helped him volunteer for a sports team. He's been doing all of that for the last, whatever, 2011, so 12 years, okay? Their neighbor down the street, exact same age son, exact same disability, was in the day program at the same time, but the family wasn't all that interested. They just kind of, what's next, right? So their plan after our day program ended was to find another day program. Their son is still in a day program 11 years later. So let's just think about the numbers for a minute, right? In that day program, I don't know what that was costing per year, $7,000 a year for both of them, something like that. So that's like attendance plus transportation-ish, right? So one guy gets a full-time, well, 20-hour-a-week job. Boom, for the last 11 years, all he's doing is a little bit of transportation, right? The other guy continues on and nudges upward. The first guy, whose family is committed, he still lives with his family. He's got a ton of stuff going on, connections in his church, connections with his sports, connection from work, all that stuff. The other guy has just moved into his first group home. So again, the expenses to Hamilton County for person A is, here's Starfire's day program, boom, right? But the expenses for person B, Starfire's day program, boom, right? So the difference in that story, as I knew it, was the family's commitment. The family's love, of course, both families love their son, but the family's commitment to their son living outside of all that as much as possible. I said, we still have to compromise and do some stuff that we don't agree with, but the second thing was I read this book. Now, notice this is Richard Thaler. I don't think he's related to Nancy. I tried to Google that, didn't find any connection, so it might be a 23andMe situation, but book called Nudge. And it says, the way to tackle big problems might be with small, tiny solutions. So one example would be, we had a problem with people saving for retirement in this country. People would not opt into their 401k system. It was too much paperwork. They had to decide on where to invest it. So they ended up deciding that if you just opted people in automatically, it was too much of a pain in the ass for them to opt out. And guess what? It worked. Yeah, everybody's in the 401k system, right? So actual human psychology is opt people in so that they have to opt out. I thought that was interesting. What could we, that's a question, as a system, opt people into automatically? And they have to do the energy and the task of opting out. That's a question I have. The second thing that they did was they figured out that kids weren't eating healthy lunches. And their solution was, we'll take the healthy food and just make it right at the front near their trays in their hands. And we'll take the junk food and we'll put it in the back. And they have to actually ask a lunch person to go get the thing that we don't want them to have. They can have it, but they got to really go to a big effort, right? Guess what they found? People were taking healthier options because it was easier for them, right? And the unhealthy stuff was out of reach. Another great question. What are the things that we can offer easily? The third thing they did was they had people, they were worried about organ donors. So they said, well, what if every time somebody tries to renew their license, they actually have to check yes or no that they want to be an organ donor. It's required before you can even get it. Because before, you would just renew your license, right? But if you ask people that they have to make the decision, they found out that most people would decide to be an organ donor. But when it was too much of a pain to actually check the box, they just left it blank. and their organ donation numbers rose, right? So again, what are things that we can do? What are nudges? Does that make sense? Fun little stories. So we did this little interesting project. Fietta and Julie, remember this? We did like a 6-month story with them. They're the early intervention team in Hamilton County. And we were studying this problem of why are we getting generational loneliness around people with disabilities, and our system seems to be going broke. And one of the things we were studying with the EI team, 2 awesome people, was what's happening in that first meeting, the first time you interact with our system, right? And they found a couple things with our help. One is it the RBI form? Is that right? Is that what it's still called? Yeah, the RBI form at that time was 9 pages long. I'm hoping it's shorter. No, longer? Whew, okay. Anyway, the first 8.5 pages were what's wrong with your kid, what's the problems, what's our assessment of that. On page 9, there was one little box that said, what's your hopeful vision for the future of your child? And it was not, I'm not kidding, it was like 2 inches by 4 inches, right? And we were like, whoa. So we're spending the first meeting, 8 pages of problems, 8 pages of dour, intimidating feelings, 8 pages of shoulders, whew, getting worse and lower. And we only have 1/2 of a page that gives us some hope. What are we kind of like instituting in parents' minds from the get-go? The second thing is, and this was, Fietta in particular taught me this, was that we didn't have a generational learning pattern or rhythm. So what Fietta said was, you know, around civil rights, it's grandmothers teaching daughters, and those daughters teaching their daughters. And over time, you pass along the lessons and you get stronger and stronger. Same thing happens with women's rights, right? All of a sudden, they're teaching the generations as they come down. And we said, but the difference is with disability is it pops up brand new. It's not necessarily very often an inherited story. So how do we continue to share the wisdom of generations? So we had lots of parents who said, I want something different, right? My friends' parents who said, we have figured out how to build this, but they're not going to pass that along to anybody else. When they're done, that wisdom is done. So we started asking, what if we could institute something where parents could write letters to new parents and just say, here's the greatest hits of what I learned. That was kind of our idea back then. Interesting. Passing along generational wisdom could create some continued continuity for us, right? The last thing was, how do we actually incentivize social connection? How can we incentivize families to want to go out and meet new people and put people in their lives so that maybe some of those networks and connections can grow to be in their children's lives, right? And we kind of had this idea of a dashboard that was well before its time, and we have not visited it yet. But if anybody wants to get on a dashboard project, let me know. We were also inspired by 2 things. You can't read these, so I'm going to tell you what they are. The first one is from the Aspen Institute. And it's talking about 2 generational problems. And this is kind of like social science theory that in order to solve a tough problem, we have to address the needs of the child and at the same time, the needs of the adults in the child's life. I actually think we're really good at that. You guys are really good at that, right? You're thinking about the whole family all the time. But we were worried about a different kind of 2-generational approach, which was, what if we don't interrupt the introduction to young kids into our system, then they become stuck in the same pattern that was concerning us on that EI exploration team, right? So we kind of had the idea that maybe this was about trying some new things with younger kids so that younger families could learn something different. They could not expect that the system's their entire answer, right? And they could learn to have different expectations. In a sense, this is just Tim's opinion, I think we're living still in the shadows of our institutions. So in the 60s and 70s, when people came out of these big institutions, some of you might know some of them. I do. They had a big institutional sized hole in their life. So what do we do? Our ancestors were badasses and they said, we're going to fill that up. And they did, with cool stuff, good stuff, much better stuff than the Ridges or Orient or Longview or Apple Creek or those kind of places, right? Which is awesome. The problem is that response created an expectation that we needed institutional sized answers. And now in a new era, we were kind of seeing babies be born and need smaller answers possibly, but getting an institutional sized response. Does that make sense? So that's kind of one of my operating theories is, can we right size and maybe figure out how to really target and be smart about what kind of things people need? And I think we've done some of that work, which is really cool. But I still think there's more. And at this point in our history, we definitely saw a need for a different story for younger families, or else we were all gonna end up in big trouble, like Nancy was worried about. The second thing we were really inspired by is a company out in California called Family Independence Initiative, which is now called Up Together. And you know what these people were doing? They were working with people in poverty, right? Another label. And they said, we're spending all this money on these people that are telling people in poverty what to do. And it's not working. They have jobs, but these people don't. So they said, what if we started giving the cash straight up to families and we would pay them to meet with each other, set goals together, write about their experience, take pictures of their progress, document their data. So in a way, they were just eliminating the middleman, us, right? And we were like, wow, well, that's at least interesting. And maybe that's another thing to study. So we did. We had some coffees, actually was camping out in California, got to meet with their CEO, which was fun. So we started the Starfire Family Network. My colleague Carol Combs runs it. I prototyped it for the first 3 years till she took it over. She's awesome, by the way. Does anybody know Carol? A little bit, Lisa? If you get a chance, she's amazing. But we started to give families cash. We had one staff that left 1 year. I took that staff salary, which at the time, I wish we were in these days, was $30,000. And I divided it amongst 10 families. So each person gets $3,000 to spend on a project in their neighborhood. And they get paid $500 to do it. And we picked 500 because it was under the IRS limit of 600 that we had to report. So families got some cash and they got some resources to spend however they want. And you know what they did? The same thing our staff did. They threw parties. They had a pop-up dog park. They painted signs of hopefulness down around the pandemic. They had front yard pool parties. They painted pumpkins and had Dia de los Muertos parties in their parks. It was incredible. But more than that, they were keeping the connections. Even though our staff were doing awesome connecting, when our staff left, all those connections faded, right? But families were able to hold on to them because they were their connections. And they were legitimate members of a neighborhood, not our staff, who are just people hired from all over the city, right? So it was really pretty cool. And each family got a mentor. So now we have 10 family mentors who continue to do interesting projects in the neighborhood, and they're mentoring somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 people per year, right? And we're always trying to grow more mentors. So we're trying to address that generational inherited story so that families can share with families. This is what I learned about overcoming my fear of knowing my neighbor. This is the person who popped up for me. Here's the 2 lessons we teach families. Sorry, it's true. The system will always system. and that's sometimes going to disappoint you. And community will always community. And sometimes that's going to surprise you. We don't know how, we don't know where these things happen, but we just kind of help them look at that. And you know what they discover? I do need the system, but I don't need it to be the center. And I do need my community, but why is it always at the edge? Right? So families have started to add people into their lives. It's been incredible success for us. Let's see here. Oh, I want to run some numbers by you for this. At this point, when we started this, we were paying 4 staff roughly $50K a year. They were getting like 30, 35K in salary plus benefits, right? And so we're investing in their learning and all this stuff. So 4 staff, 50K a year roughly of investment, that's $200,000 a year. They were serving about 8 people as connecting in their community. And we shifted that money over time. And now what that looks like is roughly cut in half cost-wise. $100,000 that goes out roughly. It's a coordinator, right? Carol, plus her team of people that help families, plus budgets for families. So it's cut in half, and we're supporting what, 25 or so families per year, more and more as we build the mentorship capacity up, right? So we eliminated half of our staff cost by investing in families instead, and got the benefits of connections sticking with families, which is interesting and important. And now families are kind of leading the way for us. Also, every one of those good 4 staff, they're awesome people. I could give you their names. They're wonderful, but they don't work here anymore. Every single one of the families of the 40s, whatever number of projects we've done in the last year are still, guess what, connected to their child, which is cool. So again, we're investing in permanence. So we think families developing new expectations of systems and community is critical. And we have another question, which my colleague Jan, you got to meet her too. You're right, Lisa. There are people, where's this? Yeah, people are dynamic at Starfire. Jan's cool too. Robbie's cool too. She's in the back. She brought up this question. She's like, is this just a staffing crisis? And I was like, oh my gosh, what a great question. Because it's not. It's actually a connection crisis. When you think about it, it's our staff are filling that big hole. And some of us, at least I was, are creating an emptiness with our sales pitch and programs, right? We'll do it. Don't worry about your community or the people around you or your family. We got it. So anyway, we think that this is a connection crisis, and the way that we've been thinking about it most recently is it's kind of a supply chain issue. So think back to the beginning of the pandemic, and the worst day was when you realized you had to go find toilet paper. You remember that? That was awful, right? What did you do? How did you solve that problem? You searched every single store. You went online, you went to Amazon, you went to Target.com, you signed up for every single store's app that you could to try to get toilet paper, right? What else happened? My wife forgot to buy toilet paper once, and her friend from her book club dropped off 3 rolls until the click list came, right? So all of a sudden people started sharing some. I live in Kentucky, so it's very possible people came up with some more creative options. We will not discuss that except for to talk about the ingenuity of Kentuckians. Anyway, I think we've done a pretty good job of this too. For example, smart homes. When they first came out, I was like, oh no, everybody gets to live in a robot home. Wonderful, right? But actually, who wants somebody up in their business 24/7 telling them what to do and that leaves every 6 months? That's a good nudge, right? Actually gives some more room for somebody else that might need more staff, right? And employment first, right? My friend who got a job decreases pressure on the system by working versus his friend who stays in the day program system and the Medicaid system for his entire life, right? So we've done some pretty good nudges, and we at Starfire had learned too, families could nudge, staff could nudge, et cetera. So we're really getting some traction around that stuff. But I still think, we're missing the biggest market share possible. So here's some numbers. I think they're mostly up to date. In Hamilton County, Ohio, there are 820,000 people. Okay, that was based on some census data. That was relatively recent. Your all's report said you served 7,300 people. I think that was a few years ago-ish. Does that make sense? Okay, so we got 8,200 people, 8,200,000 people in Hamilton County. 7,300 of them are served by the County Board of DD Services. Hamilton County data from the census says that most families have 3 members. So if you consider that of those 7,300, they're in a family of 3, that means there's 25,000 people that are a person with a disability served by Hamilton County Board or their family member. Does that sound about right? We're not too far off. When you get in big numbers, you get to like play around a little bit, right? So we're 25,000. And then I was like, well, the service system, us, there's probably a couple thousand of those. Do we know numbers on that? What is it? Okay, so maybe would be under 5,000, right? Ish, can't be too far off. So let's just say there's 30,000 people in Hamilton County that are served by the board or related to somebody served by the board or work in a system service. Let's do the math. What's 820,000 minus 30,000? 790,000 people. So when we think of supply chain issues at Starfire, we think about 790,000 people. We are missing the largest market share, the largest provider of inclusion. I don't think we're doing enough to ask people that live in Hamilton County to know one person, to maybe come to support and be a part of one person's life. Even if you said, well, hey, Tim, 100K of those are people that need care themselves. Or, hey, Tim, 100K of those are people under the age of 15. Whatever, let's still focus on the youth. What mindsets are we introducing? What opportunities are we creating in schools, right? So I really think that our emerging market is our community. It is the people around us. And accidentally, we're marketing a story of, we got this. It's special needs, which means special services, versus, hey, you got this, and we can be your supporters. Check our time. We could go on all day. I think that's the key, is that can we invest in the new story of community and citizens who want to be invited into something else than just writing a check, volunteering once a year, right? Can we invite people into actively engaging? What could our system's capacity be if we thought about things that way? We might have to tell that new story about ourselves, about the people we support. We'd have to get rid of those mindsets that say, it's the county that takes care of that, or it's Starfire that takes care of that. We'd have to start investing in families, giving them cash, saying, hey, we trust you with this, right? And we do some of that, tiny bit, but maybe more. And I think that these are things that are generational, right? But these are the things that we're just kind of thinking about. What do we start now? What can we do differently to invite our community in? So, Lisa, this is the last slide. Flattening the curve. Everybody knows what that meant, right? It was like, was it successful or not? Ish, whatever. But what was the point? It was to manage the capacity of the system, right? We weren't going to try to solve the problem or eliminate the problem. We were just going to try to manage the capacity. And that's what I'm trying to share with you today is we got to manage the capacity. And Nancy's right. And if she were in this room, she'd say, and it's going to be worse over the next 30 years. So we've got to continue to manage the capacity. And I don't think that we're going to live in an age of opulence where we have $1 bazillion to continue to hire people. And even if we did, the demographics are up against us. So we have to look to where are their numbers for this scale of a problem or this scale of an opportunity. And what's cool about that is that as we invite those 790,000 residents of Hamilton County into knowing one person that they meet on a regular basis around them, their mindsets change and they start to see people by their names. That's how we change culture. Right, Steve? All right, great. Questions, thoughts, reflections, rebuttals, arguments. It's been a pleasure, really. I appreciate y'all and I appreciate your work. I still think we have more of it, right? And how we do it matters.
Thanks. All right. Anybody have some questions? Let's throw up the what's going on. What are your thoughts about this?
I will add one thing. Our very newest effort. We were so excited by the family projects that now we're launching 10 projects this year that are run by neighbors. So we're giving neighbors money to do something with their neighbor with a disability in their community. They're now in the driver's seat of making sure people show up to meetings, of making sure people get stuff rolling, making sure that it relates to the person and their family. And we're not even putting that on the family as a responsibility. Us? Well, we are funding it ourselves right now. So donate at starfirecincy.org/give or something like that. But
They have a vendor table. Go check it out.
what we're hoping is that there is some interest one day in peeling off some of these dollars to say, what do we do to help neighbors get started, right? Because there's a lot of money out there. There's some questions that we have about how it's used. And could we free it up, unencumber it?
So, okay, here we go. Somebody else was going to say, because I don't want to, I bring up controversy. I don't want to be the one to bring it up.
Tim, I'm Todd from Wyandotte County. Thank you for sharing that. It's
Thanks,
super
Todd.
interesting, thought-provoking. I appreciate it. Also, being somebody who's responsible for, local people's money. What are you finding? What are the positives that you're finding? I think we heard those, but have you had to rein some folks in about? Are there rules with the spending of some of this money?
Yeah, so we thought that was the biggest question. If you give families money, you are going to open the door to fraud, right? We haven't had any of that. And we've done tons of those projects. We were bringing our institutional mindset and laying it on families. But actually, we find that affection and family is a much better bet, because I can tell you where most of the fraud, I think, comes from. And it ain't families. With neighbors, it's kind of the same thing. So it's the mentorship mechanism. They meet every single month. So if a family said, you know what, I think I'm going to go ahead and just buy ourselves a TV so we can watch this movie night. And we'd be like, oh, hold on a second. Now, how is that going to bring neighbors into your life, right? So what you create, again, is a check-in opportunity where families are accountable to the person they're working with. And it's not a you can't or you shouldn't. It's more like, well, could you buy a projector and a big screen instead? And that way everybody can come versus coming to your living room.
So are the neighbors and families invested already?
We don't know. We don't even know the people that show up to projects, and we don't show up ourselves because it's not our neighborhood. We just say, look, you're in charge of your neighborhood, you're in charge of your project, send us a few pictures, but it's family independence. It's like freedom, right? And you have to learn through our trust in you how to do that on your own. But then we teach families like, okay, I know it's scary, but ask the one person that waves to you to get coffee and ask them for an idea of how to spend a couple $1,000, right? And that's an invitation into the neighbor to say, wow, we never thought about it, but you know what we need is a dog park. And all of a sudden you got a pop-up dog park, right? So it's about helping the families kind of start to network, and they're afraid of rejection, right? This is not our problem. We are welcoming people. The problem is we're welcoming them into the dead end of a lot of our services, right? But the neighborhood itself isn't trained, supported, or invited into being, in my opinion, as hospitable as they could be. So they bring their cultural assumptions, which then leads the family to say, well, I tried that once and they told me no. Or those people don't, they look at me weird, which is true. So we're just trying to help them step into courage. It's another reason why we're excited about the neighborhood projects too, is what if neighbors could start. So. Yeah. No, you can put some good, you can put some good parameters on things, right? Let me tell everybody, we're like, this is not a junket to Vegas, unless you bring your neighbors, in which case it is.
Yeah, that's a movie, isn't it?
I'm down. I'd gladly fund that.
All right. Got time for one more. Anybody else? Comment, question?
Keep up the good work, y'all.
Yeah, thank you. And let's give a hand to Tim. All right. Woo!